Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. We have a wonderful crowd here today. My name is Adrienne Smith. I'm the president and CEO of the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition. Before I get too far into things, I want to introduce our Spanish language interpreters, Denise and Sandra. And Denise, could you tell us how this works?
There is interpretation available. Within the next seconds, you will be able to select the globe at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation and select your preferred language, English or Spanish. On your phone, tap your screen, select the three dots, then select the globe and your language. Hay interpretación disponible. Dentro de unos segundos podrá seleccionar el globo terráqueo en la parte inferior de la pantalla y seleccionar su idioma preferido, inglés o español. Si está en su teléfono, toque su pantalla, seleccione los tres puntos, luego seleccione interpretación y su idioma. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so your language options are available. So as Denise mentioned, look for that interpretation globe down on the bottom and choose English or Spanish. And we'll get started. Without promising too much, I am hopeful we will have a DNA interpretation, maybe in a couple of months. So I hope there are folks who might be interested in that and in need of that. Yes, Sandra, I will activate you as an interpreter if you don't mind putting your email address one more time in the chat box. That would be helpful. One announcement that I'd like to make is to introduce you to a woman here named Linda Barrel. And Linda, I'm going to take you off mute so you can make an announcement at the beginning of this class. And I believe you should be able to speak right now and make your announcement.
Okay, so hi everyone. So my name is Linda and I am working with Adrienne and the coalition to support their grant that enables you to receive this training. So I'm looking for volunteers to stay on either after this meeting or to arrange a separate meeting with me. So I can just ask you 5 quick questions about your experience with the training you received. So it's important for me to note that I see my role as this evaluator as supportive for the coalition in that they can continue doing the kind of work they do and get the funding that they do. So the interviews will be anonymous. I may use quotes, but as I say, it's anonymous. So whatever you say is only to benefit both the coalition and your experience in online courses. So I hope you can stay on afterwards or let me know maybe afterwards. If you can't make it today, we can arrange a time for a few of us to meet later. That would be awesome. And I'm also kind of looking for recipients, care recipients. So if you have any people, family members that you're caring for that would like to participate in their own little separate meeting, I would really appreciate that. Again, this is a supportive, I take a supportive role in my role as evaluator. All right, so thank you for considering volunteering. And thank you, Adrienne.
Thank you, Dr. Barrel. And as we conclude here at the end of the hour, we'll make just a reminder announcement for those who are able or want to stay on. Thank you, Linda. Dana, would you mind putting Linda Barrel's, I think it's lbarrel@unm.edu in the chat box, please, for any people who might want to contact her separately? That'd be great. And I'll get started. New Mexico Caregivers Coalition was formed 12 years ago. We started in 2009, and we started as a series of listening sessions or town halls, which I found at the time to be pretty common in and around New Mexico. We went all around the state asking caregivers to come out and talk to us. It won't surprise you that they came out in droves and talked to us from 8 different locations and told us about the things that were important to them. I thought that caregivers were going to tell us that wages and benefits and things like that were the most important. Those were important things to them. Even if they were family caregivers who were unpaid, they still wanted to know how might they get paid by the state or federal government to take care of a loved one. But time and again, the thing that people told us over and over was the most important thing was that respect and recognition for the value of the work that they do. So that gave us our first kind of marching orders for what the coalition ought to be. And we decided to just make it a wide open door to all kinds of people from all over, as you know, far and wide, not limited to family caregivers, not limited to only paid caregivers. We also didn't want to limit it just to caregivers of people who took care of those who were elderly, but also people with disabilities. So we've kind of been growing one person at a time. And I think we've definitely found that there's a need for it. And it's not a need that's unique to anything we saw. This is happening all over the country. And I think you would agree that this is, I wouldn't have to tell you that the statistics are that this is the fast growing set of occupations, personal care and home care, fastest growing occupation in our state by far. It beats any other growth in our state in terms of occupations. So Pam Stafford's presentation today is ideal for recognizing you and all the skills that you've got. Right before we introduce Pam, I want to introduce a really important person to the coalition. Many of you, if not most of you on this meeting, know her. Dana has been with the coalition and she's now the director of programs, and she's been with the coalition for 6 years, I think. So Dana, could you tell them a little about what you do and maybe anything that they should do with regard to their Q&A or the chat box or anything?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so glad to have you joining us today for our re-entering the job market training today. As Adrian mentioned, I am program director of the New Mexico Caregivers Coalition and have been with the coalition for about 6 years now, which is awesome. I help with program. You may have spoken to me via email or phone or seen lots of emails coming from me since I've been the one scheduling and handling registrations for all of these trainings. So thank you for being so patient with the many trainings we've been holding these last few months. We're so glad to see so many people returning and seeing new faces in these events. So we really appreciate it. For today's event and training, I just wanted to point out a few little Zoom etiquette things that we're going to ask of you. So this is a Zoom webinar. You may have seen that our previous trainings may have been Zoom meetings. So this session's a little bit different since we're using the webinar format instead of the meeting format. So for anyone who has topic related questions to today's presentation on re-entering the job market, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. It's kind of close to the interpretation button. If you looked for that interpretation button, it's in the same menu area. It says Q&A. So if you have questions during today's presentation for our presenter, you can submit them using the Q&A box. We will be reading those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A session at the end. If you have any questions regarding maybe tech issues, or if you're having issues with your audio, etc., regarding Zoom itself, or questions regarding your participation, you can put those in the chat box. Adrian and I will kind of be reviewing those during today's session. So just to clarify, anything tech related questions or questions that maybe need to be directed to me can go in the chat. If it's a question directed about the topic of today's session, directed to our presenter, you can put those and submit those through the Q&A box.
Thank you, Dana. And now, what we've all been waiting for. Pam Stafford has been working in New Mexico for the last 26 years. I think I have known Pam Stafford for just about as long as I've lived here, which is about 17 years. I can tell you that she is a woman of her word. If you've got her on your side, you know you've got a trusted partner. You've got somebody at your back helping you with all kinds of things. She's not only been a professional mentor of mine over these years, but a personal friend. She's an outstanding person with great qualities. And Pam, I'm running into your time too, so I'm going to spotlight you and let you just get moving.
Thank you. Thank you for the nice words, and thank you to everyone for taking your time today to share this for us rainy afternoon. I'm going to share my screen because I do have a PowerPoint today. What I've done is this is re-entering the job market, returning to the workforce. And I understand that really we wanted to focus on the family caregiver who might be returning to the workforce. But that may be in several different capacities, and also that we may have some paid caregivers who don't necessarily work with family members who may also be attending. So I've touched on a few different topics, and I'm really hoping that by trying to be broad and general, you're able to take something away from today's discussion. What we're going to be talking about is changes in the economy, some general guidelines on job seeking, getting credit for caregiving, giving yourself credit, getting credit from your potential employer, and then some post-COVID considerations in what is for all of us, I think, a changing world, and a world in which we're not really completely sure of the future. So we're going to start with some changes in the economy. And I'm going to start with family caregiving, because as Adrian pointed out, family caregiving is such a significant aspect of our economy today. I want to start by quoting an AARP study that was published yesterday. So it's as new as information as we can, updated information as we can possibly get. There are today 48 million unpaid caregivers in the US. 3/4 of family caregivers actually pay out of pocket more than $7,200 annually for the cost of caregiving. That's for modification to houses, that's for supplementing some rent, that's for paying for respite, that's for some medical costs, medication copays. 6 in 10 unpaid caregivers work half or full-time jobs. And the report actually said that if you're in that 6 to 10, 6 out of the 10 unpaid caregivers category, where you are working half or full-time jobs, the amount that you're paying out of pocket for caregiving is about $10,000 rather than $7,200. So in that way, family caregivers need to balance the cost of work and the cost of the care that they're providing for family members. According to Forbes magazine in February of 2021, the number of unpaid family caregivers increased by 20% in the pandemic year. And that's a huge historic increase. It makes some sense when you think about the fact that many family caregivers, many care recipients perhaps would have had other options for caregiving if there wasn't a pandemic. So those who were already providing caregiving before the pandemic said that the number of hours that they provided care increased from an average of 17 hours per week to 28 during the pandemic year. And again, that makes sense. If it was difficult to have home health aides come to your home, then you would increase the amount of care that you were giving for your family member. So all of that impacts our state of the economy. And this again is a new article that came out in the Washington Post yesterday, but I bet we all have seen different headlines. As pandemic restrictions are lifted, our economy is bouncing back far better than anybody thought that it could, except that employers are complaining and are having problems finding enough employees. Without enough, it's not just that employers are complaining, it is a huge problem. With worker shortage, that means that there are issues, for instance, with currently there is a problem with having enough gas. And it's not that we don't have the gas, it's that we don't have the truck drivers to deliver gasoline to all the stations. So not being able to have enough employees to fill orders, to open up restaurants full time, for retail environments, that's a huge problem that is threatening to hold back the nation's economic recovery. And especially retail, restaurant, and childcare industries say that even signing bonuses and increased wages haven't been enough incentives to hire. And so you see signs like McDonald's paying $15 an hour, and then you wonder what that does for, if that's a long-term signing wage, if it's a short-term wage. Signing bonuses are definitely short-term. So the economy right now is definitely in this state of flux. And there's different perspectives and reasons for the lack of available employees. And I hope I don't offend anybody by showing this picture that was posted on social media from a local restaurant. The restaurant industry has been hit as hard as any other industry in terms of costs. Tipped employees have been hit hard, but also businesses have been hit hard. Many restaurants have simply had to close their doors. And it must be extremely frustrating to be at the point where you know you can open and not have the workers that you need in order to open up fully. Many business owners find that the continuation and possibility for unemployment, extended unemployment benefits, and some of the protections that were put in, such as monthly child care or rental assistance, is having the impact that it's not creating the urgency for people to return to work. And there may be truth in that, but there's also truth from the workforce perspective about why they may be a little slower to look for work. We've all lived through a pandemic, but we've lived through it in different ways. And essential employees, those who have gone out to work on a daily basis throughout the course of the pandemic, they have experienced a high degree of stress during the pandemic year. And I think many people are more retrospective about their choice of careers, about their life in general. If there's any time to think about the meaning of life, it's probably been in a 100-year global pandemic. Higher demands for workers means that employees have more options. And so that's some of the reasons why businesses are struggling. Unpaid caregivers might struggle in particular with returning to work if they see exposure to virus variants. The variant now that's being talked about is the Delta variant. If they see that as a threat to family members with poor health, they may be reluctant to return to work. So there's still some uncertainty. We all want to open up and go back to a new normal. And yet I think it's also natural to have some hesitancy about what that means. In addition to not being able to hire new employees, employee resignations have skyrocketed. In April 2021, there was kind of a second wave of people quitting their jobs in unheard of numbers. 4 million Americans quit their jobs in April 2021. And often these were people who left, they had jobs and they left positions for other jobs. So they didn't simply quit their jobs, they left their jobs because they had found other jobs that they wanted more than the jobs that they had. But that has left a vacancy problem. It shouldn't surprise anybody that this is occurring. The fact is that unfortunately, when you have 600,000 people die in the United States, some of those people have jobs which are now vacant. The other reality is that as people are being retrospective about their life, many people who were retirement age and were pushing off retirement have decided to retire. And so those jobs have created vacancies. And so the idea that people might be moving and changing jobs to look more specifically for what they want in a position should not be that surprising. But 740,000 employees who quit their job in April were in the leisure and hospitality industry, restaurants, bars, hotel, entertainment venues. So that's almost a quarter of those who left. And in addition to kind of the entry-level positions, tipped employees, many management level professionals in that industry have left, saying that their time at home convinced them that they wanted to limit their work hours to 40 hours per week. And many jobs in restaurants and hotels, if you're a mid-level manager, means that you often work far more than 40 hours a week. So in terms of being retrospective, people are saying that's not necessarily how they want to spend their post-pandemic time. Some have been able to find employment with more flexible work arrangements, such as a hybrid approach to working in the office. Will there be long-term changes to the economy? It depends on which experts you read. And I've spent some time in the last few days preparing for this, looking at a lot of different reports from a lot of different experts who all have a different opinion on this. But definitely we know that women were disproportionately affected by the pandemic. They left the workforce during the pandemic year in greater numbers. And that investment in caregiving jobs would allow the unpaid family caregiver to return to work. And so that may be what has to happen in order to re-engage a portion of women back into the workforce. Employers might need to understand the need of the family caregiver and offer some more flexible arrangements. And then the final thing is that it was interesting to look back at reports from last June. If you remember last June, we were opening up and then we closed back down. And if you look at those reports when we were only a few months into this, many experts were predicting that the American workplace would be a kinder and more pleasant workplace, that we would understand mental health needs more because many of us experienced an increase in mental health concerns during the pandemic year, that we would understand the need to have family caregiving arrangements more. And I'm hopeful, but I'm not completely convinced because I know that mankind has a short memory and that we're extremely resilient, and there's good things about that, but there's also the fact that we may not remember this time as vividly as we think we would like to. So to some degree, I think whether or not we have a kinder and more pleasant workplace environment kind of long-term in the future is really dependent on the American worker and how they believe the workforce should be treated. And so what does all of this mean to the paid caregiving community? That becomes even harder to foresee. Some jobs require physical proximity. So we're going to talk quite a bit at the end of this presentation about the opportunity to work at home and hybrid work environments. But for the caregiving community, most of that will not be possible. Most folks still require some physical proximity to the person you're providing care to. And so an investment in caregiving becomes really important. And it's not the topic of this conversation, but I do want to encourage people to look at the Better Jobs, Better Care, Better Jobs Act that is pending in our federal Congress, because that bill would mean better jobs for caregivers, and that would allow some unpaid family caregivers to return to jobs in the community. I want to move on now and switch gears kind of completely and talk about general guidelines in seeking employment. And these things are kind of same as it ever was, even in an economy where there is an abundance of available workers and a shortage of jobs or vice versa. These things always kind of apply. In looking for a new job, you need to consider what is the best job match for you. And the job match means what's best for you and what is best for the employer. But really, it's mostly about you. And you need to do your own evaluation of what kind of work you want going forward. What job do you feel motivated to do? And what job are you qualified to do? And really thinking through those two questions will help you to arrive at a job that you want to have. Some ways to think about that is to think about what you liked best about your favorite job, or what did you like least about your least favorite job. Try to duplicate the best. Try to not get in the situation where you're in your least favorite job again. The other thing to think through is to ask your family and friends what job they think you would be best suited for. Sometimes they have a more objective opinion. Also think through what you did in your leisure time, what you did in this last year when you weren't caring for your family. When you had time, how do you fill your time? What do you need to make work successful for you? What do you need in terms of hours? What do you need in terms of flexibility? Not everybody works well with flexibility. Some people, need structure. They need a place to go and they need set hours and they need to be told what to do. What pay is reasonable for you? How do you want to be respected in your workplace? Do you have a passion or a mission that you want to fulfill? And I will say that it's okay not to. I am reminded of a friend of mine, a work colleague, and whenever I would start talking about employment for people with disabilities and start talking about passion and mission, he pulled me aside one day and said, my passion is my family. It's my wife, it's my kids, it's my parents. And I want a job, and I have a job, he had a job, where I make enough money to support people and I can go home when I need to go home, and I'm not traveling all the time. And that's what it's about for me. As long as I have a job that does that and allows me to have my home life, then I'm happy, because that's my passion and mission. So we're all unique. Some of us need to have work that fills us with the passion, and others see work as a means to an end for our other passions. But the reality is that today, you might never have a better opportunity to think through your needs and to talk to an employer about what you want more than you will have, than you've ever had in the past or you will ever have in the future. Some things will not change. You will still need to have a resume. You'll still need to fill out an application. Have someone you trust review your resume for spelling and grammar. Neatness counts, so always make it as neat as possible. Change your resume for specific jobs, and this is always true. But I read in the research I did the last couple of days that more than ever, if you're looking for a job that's not entry level, if you're looking for a manager's job or a job in a different career path, really people are wanting to see a specific objective. They don't want to see seeking a job in sales or customer service. They want to know that you want their job. And so it's not hard to change your objective in a resume and print it off and send it in for a specific job. And then we're going to be talking in the next section about including your time as an unpaid family caregiver on your resume. Confidence in interview, be on time. 15 minutes early is generally considered to be on time. That way, if something does happen on your way, you're okay. Don't go more than 15 minutes early. You'll just make people nervous about the fact that you're waiting for them. Do be prepared to wait. People do get busy. And hopefully in most interviews, the person interviewing you is also on time. Generally, if they're HR manager, they're on time. But if it's a smaller business, you may have to wait longer. And if you have waited longer than 15 minutes, ask the employer if they still have time to meet with you. Say something like, I really appreciate your time today. Is this still a good time? I could reschedule if necessary. And the reason you are doing that is because if the employer is thinking about the next thing they have to do or the crisis they just solved, and they feel they're in a time crunch, they are not going to focus on you. With the next applicant that walks in, they might focus on that applicant because they have more time. That's unfair to you. So if nothing else, not only are you giving an opportunity to reschedule, showing some politeness, but you're also, if you're continuing with the interview, then you're forcing the employer to realize that they're talking to you and that they need to pay some attention to you. Be friendly to everyone. You may be a great potential candidate, and if you have been rude to the receptionist, you will not get the job. And then there's always discussions about dressing for success. And what does that mean if you're maybe applying for an entry-level position? And typically you should think about dressing for the position one level above the position for which you are applying. So if you're applying for an entry-level position, do not dress like the CEO. But always dress for just that next position so that they know that you're taking the job seriously. Practice your answers to questions. A very typical one is tell me about yourself, and that often stumps people, and it shouldn't because you should have practiced it. So when people ask about yourself, what they want is your experience and the reason you are applying for the job. It's fine to say, oh, I just recently moved to New Mexico, or I've been in New Mexico my whole life, I'm a native. But tell your experience and the reason you're applying. That's what they really want to know. We're kind of taught not to brag about ourselves. Brag about yourself in the interview. It's really important. And then there's sometimes a question around weaknesses that people have difficulty answering. And I always think of the fact that we all just have personality traits. And sometimes it's a weakness and sometimes it's a strength, depending, quite frankly, on the position and the job. That's why you're looking for the job that's the right job match for you. So you can always express a strength as a weakness. That, for instance, you're really detail-oriented, so you always learn to complete your work far in advance of deadlines. No employer is going to even remember that answer was an answer to the question, what are your weaknesses? They're just going to remember that you've answered that way. Or you can talk about your actual weaknesses as long as you identify what to do to compensate for the weakness. And so I, for instance, am not a morning person. I actually like to begin my work about 7. I just don't want to interact with human beings until about 8:30. But that gives me that hour and a half to kind of look at what I did the day before, what I finish up, any things that's still on my mind, think about what I have to do that day, kind of organize my time and my day. And then I feel really productive for the rest of the day. But if I start my day with a meeting, it's probably not going to be as productive of a meeting. Other people may say at 3 o'clock, they don't want to have any meetings after that because they're tired. So whatever your weakness is, but think about it in advance, because you're going to want to answer that question in a way that doesn't reflect poorly on you. Be prepared for your sensitive questions, and we all have them. So what question do you absolutely not want to be asked? And then practice your answer when you get asked that question. And it can be, we all have those. So if you have a job history where you've had several jobs of less than 3 years, why you've had these short-term jobs. On the other hand, if you worked at your last job for 17 years, for some employers, that's going to be a red flag. Where you be able to adapt to a new work routine. So think through, again, the last question in the world you ever want to be asked, how are you going to answer it if it comes up in an interview? And after the interview, always send a thank you note and a follow-up. That's the most important thing you can do. So now I want to talk briefly, but importantly, about getting credit for caregiving. The family caregiver is a title to be respected. What else possibly could be a more important title or more important work that you've done in your life? And yet we haven't always valued it. It's interesting that LinkedIn has started allowing categories of stay-at-home parent, stay-at-home mom, stay-at-home dad, homemaker on your profile. But they are not including unpaid family caregivers. You can't list yourself as a family caregiver and not say who the employer is. And so that there's some efforts to change that. On your resume, if you have been an unpaid family caregiver, you're going to say that, you need to put the dates, and you need to put a description and a skill summary of what you've done. We need to stop apologizing for performing this critical work. And I think we do it. And I know when I ran a company that provided support for people with disabilities, people would come in and I was looking for family caregivers. That's the experience I wanted. And yet they would apologize for having not worked in several years. It just, this is important work, and it's important work that people recognize. So when it's appropriate, for instance, you may want to put down trainings that you've received, CPR, first aid, definitely the leadership training that you may have had with the Caregivers Coalition. If you are looking for a caregiving position, you absolutely want to put down, for instance, if you've taken the dementia training that they recently offered, the OSHA training that they offered, you may want to put that down for any job, because guess what? Any job is going to have that same requirement for lifting and for pathogen spread prevention. Some ways in which you can list your skills. For instance, people will say, "Oh, I cooked for my mom." Well, did you prepare meals with a specialized diet, such as low in salt, or specifically for people with diabetes? Because that requires a special skill. Or did you have to blend food or dice food in order to reduce aspiration risk? Did you lift and transfer care recipients with paralysis? Did you implement occupational therapy strategies to assist care recipients with memory retention where you're responsible for prescription refill and medication assistance. All of those are jobs which require a great deal of responsibility. And I will say here, especially if you are a young person without work experience and you have spent your last year providing some unpaid family caregiving, and any of these apply to you, I don't care what job you're looking for. Listing this will show that you are a person capable of assuming responsibilities. Also, sometimes caregivers take on financial management. Sometimes they're even court-appointed guardians or conservators. So have you had to file court reports? Have you had to retain receipts and prepare for an audit? If so, that's again a level of responsibility that you should be listing. And then I just listed some ways in which you may want to explain what your job title was during this time. I want to move on to talk about post-COVID restrictions. You should always ask questions of employers. This is true of any time. But here are some post-COVID questions that you may want to ask. What changes to the company has occurred because of the pandemic? How will the company respond in another shutdown? The vaccination questions is iffy. Because of the PHI requirements, protected health information, some employment attorneys are saying that you cannot ask your employees whether or not they have been vaccinated, but that you can absolutely have a policy in place related to wearing masks for non-vaccinated employees or customers. What is their policy related to employees coming to work while sick? Pre-COVID, I think most employers wanted to know that you were dedicated enough to come into work even if you weren't feeling well. And that meant that a lot of people spread and accepted the fact that they would have summer colds and strep throat and flu, and that it would spread throughout an office. There really is no need for any of that, and especially if employees have gotten used to working from home. Can an employee work from home or not come in if they have any symptoms that may, not just of COVID, but of any other illness? And then what is your leave policy related to time off for family health care needs? I want to end my talking because I know we have family caregivers who may be returning to work in office settings. And right now, I think the most unsure that any of us are is unsure about the future of remote or hybrid work. The fact is, remote work has been possible for decades, and proponents have argued that it creates more inclusivity for persons with disabilities or parents with children. Concerns about remote work has sometimes focused from the employer end on how can I be sure the unsupervised employee is working if they're not in the office, and from the employee end, the lack of social interaction. Work is where most adults form friendships. So during the pandemic, businesses were forced to allow for remote work. And now with openings, some are eager to return to normal and others want a new normal. So some of the challenges of remote work during the pandemic was technology challenges. Who pays for the home office, internet, cell phone, computer, printer, Zoom fatigue, which I want to talk about a little more in a little bit. Social isolation, especially when we were already socially isolated in our lives, then not to be able to go to work. Lack of spontaneous communication, teamwork, sometimes means a lack of innovation. And so that's a concern for the business industry. And then I know in the first 6 months of the pandemic, it seems like everything took longer. It took longer to get any responses or to get anything done. But there were also success. Employers actually related high productivity among most employees. There were some positions, such as, say, a sales position or receptionist position, where it was really hard for people to do that work at home. But for positions where it made sense to do work at home, employers have stated that they really did not have any issues with productivity. For the employee, there's an availability of time. Not only are you not commuting, but there's also the lack of travel time to meetings. Even if you're driving 20 minutes across Albuquerque for a meeting, and then 20 minutes back, and then 20 minutes to another meeting, it's an hour and a half that you've spent on your workday just driving. Not to mention the fact that if you're driving in a very large remote area, New Mexico is a large state. So if you're driving down to Las Cruces for meetings, that's a 6-hour workday. The other thing that employees have mentioned enjoying, if you take away the fact that it was hard to supervise children and work from home and be a family caregiver, is the ability to do some household things during breaks, right? So if I can load my laundry during a 15-minute break, or I can prepare and prep dinner at 3:30 so that it's done by the time my spouse gets home, then your home life has become more relaxed. And so that's one of the benefits. Employees created work schedules more conducive to their home life. They discovered the ability to work with long distance offices and colleagues. So a lot of businesses have employees who work around the state, and it was often pretty easy to forget about them when you were having meetings. But it really didn't matter in the pandemic world if your colleague was next door to you or in Las Cruces or in Santa Fe. And so many people who felt isolated were able to find some connection within their workplace. Also, while there are benefits to office socialization, it can also result in less productivity. And many businesses are looking at the reduced costs of office space and the costs of travel. So going forward, again, it depends on which expert you listen to in terms of what to expect from the future. But the majority of employees who work in an office environment want a hybrid approach. That's what most of the studies say. Although younger employees state that they want more time working in an office. It will be harder, I think, for employers to go back to a no work at home work policy. Some experts are predicting that the productivity measure will be more by task completion than by the 40-hour work week, but hourly employees still get paid by a 40-hour work week. So that's a labor market switch that will have to happen if that becomes the reality. Some people are eager to return to face-to-face conferences and training, and some people fear losing the opportunity and the low cost of virtual conferences and trainings. So what you may want to consider when you're returning to the workplace is to think through the possibility that remote workers may be penalized or have less opportunity for promotions due to a lack of proximity and communication with their supervisors or colleagues, especially since during the pandemic, it was women primarily who were affected and left the workforce. Women have fought the Good Boys Club for a long time. If they're working from home, will that be more of a possibility? Is the expectation of work hours 8 to 5, or is there some flexibility? And as you're returning to the workplace, can you work for a company that is not in your geographic area and work remotely? That provides you a lot more opportunity. And then I wanted to talk very briefly about Zoom fatigue. Here are the causes. Our brains are wired to not have close, intimate eye contact with multiple people for extended period of times. If we were all in a training in a room, you would not be staring at my face like this. I would not be staring at your face like this. So, and if I bent down and got really close to your face and looked in, that would be a boundary issue. And so our brains are just wired that way to wonder why we're having so much eye contact so closely. And it's impacting us psychologically. That's just the reality. Also, you feel like you are on, even if you're not facilitating or leading a meeting. Most of us have back-to-back meetings. We don't give any time in between the way we would if we were driving or if we were scheduling them at our workplace. Too much screen time means you have dry eyes and too much sitting. And so there are easy solutions. Less emphasis on sharing a video. And I have to say, last April and May, I was a stickler for people. If I was training them, I wanted them to have their videos on, even if it was a 6-hour training, even if it was 4 days a week, you know, and now I think back and I think, boy, they must have hated me. And it's just, it's not feasible that you can do that type of time on Zoom. And so, but you don't have to share your video 100% of the time. You can block in time between Zoom meetings for breaks. Also, you can still use the phone and email. Last March and April, I was amazed how many people wanted to Zoom when it's like, but we've always had phone calls in the past. Why couldn't we just have a phone call now? So I think, and again, experts are saying, no, people are tired of Zoom, or Zoom meetings are here to stay. And I think both are true. Zoom meetings are here to stay, and in person will resume as well. And a year from now, business colleges will be teaching courses on when it's best to have Zoom meetings and when it's best to do face-to-face in person. And so I hope some of this has been helpful for you. And I am open for questions. I don't see anything in the Q&A. This is my email, should anybody need to reach me, and I'll put it into the chat and stop sharing.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A. We've seen lots of people back and forth, but said hello mostly from the beginning of this in the chat function. If you think of things, let Pam know, or let any of us know with the coalition. Dana, are there things that you wanted to make an announcement about with a certificate, or maybe getting a link to this recording now that we've got it recorded?
Now that you have attended this class, if you have attended one of the previous 2 sessions in this Caring for the Caregivers series, I'll be mailing out your certificates as a group. If this is your first session, you'll be getting this one as well. If anyone there, I know I was informed there were several of you in today's session that didn't get to pre-register. So if you could please make sure that we have your mailing addresses so that we can mail you your completion certificates. I will put my email in the chat. It's dana@nmdcc.org. I want to make sure that everyone gets their certificates mailed. If you haven't already completed your pre-survey or your post-survey that we send out regarding this training, please do so. I will be sending out the post-survey tomorrow for this class. If you have people, if you know folks who maybe missed today's sessions and might be interested in today's topic, I am going to send out the recording to everyone that was pre-registered and missed it. However, if there's anyone you think may be interested but was not registered for today, feel free to also send me their email address and I can make sure I get them the recording as well.
Thank you, Dana. There is one in the Q&A. Are you considered a caregiver to your children when working? I think that means at home. That's a little bit of a stretch. It's not typically how we define caregiver, but Pam, what would you say? We definitely want you here. Let me just add that. Thank you. Go ahead, Pam.
So caregiving to your children is a little bit of a difference in terms of when we talk about being a family caregiver, which is typically for someone who is elderly, sick, or disabled, unless your children are disabled, and then you're providing perhaps some additional care beyond the role of a mother or a parent. So you're I guess you could consider yourself a child caregiver, but I don't think that would fly from most standards.
Mhm. Thank you, but we definitely want you here. Thanks for asking that question. This has been a very high demand course and series. So I'm thinking that we will need to do this again in at least a couple of months. And just a reminder for any of you who have been involved with this pre-survey, post-survey, and attending our classes in between, if you can stay on and would like to stay on and talk to Dr. Linda Barrell, our evaluator, we would love to have you stay on, and I'll promote you to a panelist as I see you. So otherwise, we will see you next time. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Erica, for your comment. Great. And Linda, I'm promoting you to panelists. So, and as we see who else is going to be staying, I'm just going to move them into the meeting here. I'm going to stop the recording.